Lama Rod, thank you
Mhm.
for sitting down with me today. I appreciate your time so much.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
It's really wonderful to have a chance to talk to you about your new book, The New Saints, From Broken Hearts to Spiritual Warriors, which was a joy for me to read. It really
Mm.
was. It's a beautiful book to hold, and what's inside of it is truly powerful. I felt so much of it was deeply resonating with me. You have a beautiful way with words. I was struck by how I really felt you as a human. Like I really
Yeah.
felt you. And at the same time, I'm getting the chills when I'm telling you this. I could feel that you were also channeling something that felt like a sacred invitation for me to experience something deeper. Whew, I got full body chills. So, congratulations. What an enormous accomplishment. And I wanted to just say I
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
for I can only imagine the amount of work
Mhm.
that isn't, pretty with rainbows and bells on it that went
Yeah.
into creating that work. So thank you for
Yeah.
bringing it into the world. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I'm
Mhm.
really happy to hear, right, your experience, because that was definitely the intention. The experience on my end was to really open wide and to practice a kind of vulnerability, which honestly was painful, right? But necessary. You know, when I started thinking about this book, I knew that I had to tell the truth. I just didn't want to write another book about what people should and shouldn't be doing.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
I had to break through to another level for me. I couldn't just tell you. You needed to be shown. Like I had to show you what work looked like.
By
You know,
doing it right in front of us
right,
and with us. Yeah.
right. Almost as if it's like just opening, like, bleeding on the page. Like,
Yeah, I felt
here's
that. There were things you wrote in there where I like, I got the chills and I got triggered in the best way.
yeah,
I got triggered in bad ways. I got like it all of it. But it was all within this container of like I always felt the
yeah,
undercurrent of this thread of this love from you. I really felt that carrying
yeah,
me through the entire experience of reading this book. It was beautiful.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it, and I would hit those moments where I would be like, "Oh, this is too much." Right?
Mhm.
No, I can't possibly share this,
Mhm.
then I would take a break, right? And just remind myself that this book is about telling the truth,
Mhm.
right? Again, not just to tell the truth because I wanted to sell books, I wanted to tell the truth because I knew that this is what people needed,
Mhm.
right? You
Mhm.
needed to hear the truth, and I wasn't interested in looking good either.
Yeah. You toward the end, you talk about yourself as a troublemaker, and I was like, I felt such a kinship with you, like, I really felt all my life, I've also been a
Mhm,
troublemaker, and
mhm,
but from a place of, like you,
mhm.
love and wanting to you're stirring things up to wake people up. You're
Yeah,
not stirring things up because you're coming from a place of
right.
wounded like, you're stirring things up from the scar, not the wound, like, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, so beautiful. So
Yeah.
for our listeners, what is a new saint? Who are they and what is the work that's before them?
Yeah. Well, I think perhaps a lot of people listening to this podcast are themselves new saints. The new saint is someone who's really committed to the work of liberation moving forward, right? Taking into account this age that we're in, this late capitalist age, this age I call apocalypse. It calls for a different kind of engagement, right? Because the apocalypse is about unveiling. It's about awakening from deception, right? From misunderstanding, right? And that awakening is painful because you're having to really understand or well confront all the lies that we've told each other, ourselves, our communities, and so forth, about who we think we are, and to start waking up means that I need to admit that, like, I'm not who I pretend to be, that there's this great brokenheartedness that I have yet to tend to. And when we commit to tending to this brokenheartedness, we enter into our sainthood, right? And, sainthood isn't about being, having these extraordinary abilities or talking to God, you know, or, being like a DC Marvel superhero. Like, that's not what we're talking about. It's wonderful if you do that, right? But what we're talking about now is returning back to the most radical, revolutionary work of giving a shit about ourselves and about our collective, about our communities, about the world, and saying, okay, what am I going to do? Like, what's my work? And my work wasn't just to sit around and just let the ship sink, right? Like, my work is to get active and say, you know what, there is a future awakening in this apocalypse, and that's where we're going. And we can't give up. This isn't a time just to give up, it's a time for us to like actually get focused and really start working. We'll never see what we need to see unless we commit to our work individually and collectively, right?
You talk in the book about awakened care,
Yeah.
learning like I love how you put it,
Mhm.
learning to give a shit. Like you
Yeah.
actually it is something you have to learn
Yes.
how to do.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about awakened care.
Yeah. Because awakened care is it's this complex experience, right? Not just casually caring about something, but feeling what needs to be cared for, like feeling that um care is how love is expressed in action. And awakened care itself, as I was thinking about, okay, what is care and what is love and compassion? I just said, oh, there's love here, which is this deep wish for people to be free, right, from suffering. And then there's compassion. And compassion is more about the action of freeing people, right, from suffering. But it's more than love and compassion. There's also joy here. There's joyfulness in being concerned and helping, right? There's a joy in telling the truth about suffering and then learning how to make different choices to free ourselves from the conditionings around suffering, right? And there's also, this experience of emptiness, right? That ultimately, right? Um, there is an essence here that is already liberated. And that's what keeps us in the game is the reality, the truth of emptiness, which I think different traditions have named different things. I call that emptiness God. In Buddhism, we call it Buddha nature. You know, this emptiness is what everything springs from, but is also the most liberated experience of everything, right? So emptiness is the space. It is the hope. It is the promise. It is the reality that we can get free. You know, and in Buddhism, to say that we're already free, we just have to remember that, right? So for me, coming back to awakened care, awakened care is how I stream together love, compassion, joy, and emptiness to give rise to this expression of care, which is divine, sacred expressions of tending to our suffering and the suffering of those around us and the suffering of the material world, including the earth, the land, the elements, and so forth, both seen and unseen as well. Like everything and everyone must be freed from this experience of suffering. That's awakened care.
And part of that, I imagine, is, and you talk about this radical, or you talk about the importance of self expression, but radical self care.
Mhm,
And I think that there's this
mhm.
sort of knee jerk reaction that we have when we know all of the horrible things that are going on, even beyond our own personal traumas
Yeah,
in the world. How could I possibly give attention to myself? How could I possibly
yeah,
care about myself? Forgive, I mean, we talk about self forgiveness
yeah.
in the book. And I wondered if you would say a little bit about the importance of self care,
Uh,
radical self care.
exactly, right, and radical self-care, and we're not talking about indulgence,
Hmm.
right? Because,
Hmm.
self-care comes with this baggage,
Yeah.
right? What we're really talking about in terms of self-care is that we're realizing that we need resources to get free. Like, freedom doesn't happen through depletion.
Hmm.
I just don't shrink and crumble in on myself and think that's how we get free. That's actually cruelty. That's being mean to our bodies, to our experience, right? Freedom happens through being resourced, replenished, right? Um, through care, right? So, people say, oh, I can't possibly do something for myself because there are so many people in the world struggling right now. Well, you won't be of any help to people in the world if you're depleted. People who are struggling to get free, struggling to survive, don't need you showing up with your depletion because you become work for them. You become someone they have to take care of as well, on top of trying to get free and trying to gather the resources that they need to be well, right? So as we witness injustice and genocide happening right now all over the world, right? It's easy to say, it's easy to shut down. It's easy to say, you know what? I'm not going to take a nap. I'm not going to eat well because so many people don't have access to this, right? And then you actually intensify your suffering, which makes it harder for you to be of benefit to people who need you right now. So I know it's a really hard thing to do, but we have to rest. Like, we have to figure out the resources that we need in order to feel replenished and to use that replenishment to go and do what needs to be done to help people survive.
When I was reading about radical self care
Mhm.
in New Saints, so much of it to me was about healing trauma,
Yeah,
healing my own inner trauma,
exactly.
because that trauma prevents me from showing up in the world as the love and the light that I actually am.
Right.
Right? That trauma makes me create this little facsimile of Kate
Yeah,
that shows up in the world as wounded, broken Kate that just goes around hurting people unconsciously.
yeah,
And that real self care, yes, it's taking a nap and taking
yeah.
care of myself so that I can actually go and do my inner work so that I can, right? There's this beautiful line in the book that you write: we can't figure out who we are beyond the trauma until we go back and figure out who we were before the trauma.
Mhm.
And that to me was one of those, there was like, oh, there was light coming off of those words for me
Yeah,
because it was just so true.
yeah,
You were pointing in such a clear direction
yeah,
for me. Like, this is where you look. This is
yeah.
where you look if you want to remember who you really are. I feel like so much of being able to do this work is, like you just said, resourcing ourselves so
Mhm,
that we actually can do the work.
mhm,
But I also feel like for many of us, it might be too painful or even impossible to receive
mm,
love from ourselves, from
exactly.
others. How how does the listener, how does the reader, how do you
Mhm.
open to receiving love? That feels like to me such a really important gatekeeper on this path.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is the number one issue everyone is struggling against, right? I think for anyone who enters into a spiritual path, I think this is the issue that comes up. Self love, self appreciation, right? Which is, again, an expression of deep depletion, right? How do I love myself? But really, honestly, when we talk about self love, we're talking first and foremost about acceptance. I need to actually tell the truth about what my experience is in this moment, right? And when I began my practice, this is well over 20 years ago now, I thought, strangely enough, that I wasn't struggling with self-love. Like, I thought I loved myself quite a bit, you know? That was at the beginning of my practice, and then over, a couple of short years, I really started touching into, I would say some darkness, some real heavy material, right? Some really, I would say, strong self-hate. And I use these practices that I'd learned in Buddhism, which were, I have to just tell myself that I deserve to be happy and safe and resourced. I just have to keep telling myself that over and over and over again, and I'll work through it. And I kept doing that, and just wasn't working, right? I
Mhm,
kept pouring everything into this experience of just darkness. Just it felt like a deep dark hole
mhm.
in the center of me, and just nothing was happening, right? And then one day in practice, it just dawned on me that maybe my work isn't to fill this up and to make it disappear. Maybe my work was just to allow it to be there, and disrupt my fixation on this experience of depletion and just say, there you are, right? And when I started doing that, this incredible space opened up around that self hate. And I realized that I could have multiple experiences that wasn't so centered around self hate, right? That it was still there, but it wasn't the totality of my experience. It wasn't the headliner of my experience. It was just one experience amongst many happening. And that's when self love really started happening for me.
So it sounds like the love was inside the hate.
Yeah,
Like, where else could it have been hiding?
yeah,
If it emerged for you when you were willing to sit down beside it and go,
yeah,
"Okay, there you are."
yeah. It's a deep acceptance, befriending. And that acceptance, it means that you just stop all of this, like, I don't know, this kind of pushing, this aggression to make something different happen. And then you just start telling your truth and say, but this is happening now. And there's a lot of like openness that comes from that. Like energy gets redirected from trying to make something disappear to just being, you know? And in that space, you start thinking, oh, wait, I'm not the only one experiencing this. Then all of a sudden you start belonging to the collective, right? Because you understand that this is a collective issue, not just one issue that I'm dealing with. Everyone's dealing with this, right? So you don't feel so alone anymore. And there's that warmth that begins to happen. It's like you feel closer to people because you're sharing this experience, and that like it begins to give you insight into why people show up in the way that they're showing up, right? That every conflict that you have isn't about you. That's often it's about the ways in which people are deeply under resourced, and they're trying their best to function under resourced, right? And that tension of trying to function under resource always leads to conflict, right? It always leads to just misunderstanding and to unskillful ways of just blaming people for our despair, right? Um, this path is really calling for us to take responsibility for our own experience, and that's hard, especially for those of us who have survived injustice and things that seem really unfair. Absolutely, it's unfair that we've survived this, but no one can heal us except for us. Like, you can hurt me, but the woundedness is what I have to tend to and work through, right? As Whitney Houston said, it's not right, but it's okay,
Mhm.
right? Which is one of my favorite. I talk about that in the book, right? It's not right. So let go of this whole like, it's not right that I have to tend to the woundedness that I experience from others, but it's okay, actually. And it's really great in another way because I get to practice agency to heal myself and not wait on something else to happen. I don't have to wait on you to apologize, right? Or to whatever. I can actually take initiative and say, you know what, here's my woundedness. Let's go tend to it. Let's hold it, right? Let's get some care into it, right?
You offer a beautiful map for forgiveness
Hmm.
that flows from what you were just saying.
Yeah,
And I wondered if you might walk people through that because when I read that, I thought, oh, this is a brand new journey with forgiveness that
yeah,
I think is the journey that's needed.
yeah. And there's this unspoken experience from a lot of folks, which is that even if we have survived injustice or harm from someone, there's still a way in which we blame ourselves for being hurt. And that's where I want it to draw our attention. And so the process in the book is bringing attention to that. It's like when I experience hurt, right, as a survivor of harm, my first priority isn't to caretake the person who hurt me, the offender, right? And so many of us have been conditioned to do that because forgiveness has been so rooted in this idea of being a good person, right?
Right.
And being good is something that I really interrogate in the book, right? Because I think goodness has been weaponized against a lot of us to keep us in line and to keep us quiet and to keep us from challenging, real injustice, right? So when we experience hurt, it's like, I don't care how the offender is doing. I'm caring about what I need. And I center me and my hurt, right? In the process. And I bring in all these resources and so forth, right? And a checklist, it's like I want to resource myself, right? Because for me, forgiveness for another person or for anyone, forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others means that like I get back to a place where I want the person, or myself to not suffer, to have everything that they need to be well, right? Forgiveness doesn't mean getting back to a place of liking people,
Hmm.
right? So when I forgive you, it means that like I'm back to a place where I want you to have what you need because maybe if you had what you needed, we wouldn't have had this experience together. But when I'm talking about self forgiveness, right? I want to get back to a place where I believe that I deserve to be here, to take up space, right? That I deserve to have access to the resources that I need, regardless of what people have done to me, that may point out the contrary, perhaps. And I want people to take time with that.
What could you say to the person who's realizing
Mm,
that maybe they've been doing this sort of automatic bypass
yeah.
when it comes to forgiveness their whole lives and they just jump to that, tending to the because I think a lot of this is just true for me. So much of my fear around that
Mhm.
is I don't want to have to go back and feel that hurt again.
Exactly, and that's the issue. Like we haven't tended to that hurt,
Right.
right? And so we just kind of push it to the side and say, "Okay, I feel okay again. Everything's forgiven." You know?
Turn the other cheek, you say. We're taught that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to because as I talk about in the book, I think that kind of philosophy really privileges offenders and perpetrators. Because as a perpetrator, we're all victims and perpetrators, right? I
Hmm.
think as a perpetrator, we don't wanna, like, feel guilty, we just, like, we've done something to someone that's created harm, and that doesn't feel great, so we just want to be forgiven and just get and keep it moving, right? So let's
Hmm.
disrupt that and say, "You know what? It's not about the offender, it's about the person who is trying to heal." So we ask ourselves, what resources do we need to feel well enough again and take as much time as we need. And then when we feel compelled, like, I just don't think forgiveness in the way that we've been taught is so, I don't think it's mandatory, right? Like,
Mhm.
you don't, no one has to forgive you. However, here's the issue. As people surviving harm, right, we have to be clear that our lack of forgiveness isn't in some way masking rage and anger, right? And if that's the case, then we won't ever be free from the hurt, right? We won't ever be free from the depletion. And we certainly won't be free from the anger that we have towards others who hurt us. And this doesn't mean that, again, we have to like anyone. Like, liking and loving are two different things, you know? Like, you don't have to be someone's friend after they've hurt you. That's not the point.
Mhm.
The point is getting to a place where the harm has been recognized. I have been offered and gathered the resources that I need to tend to my own, anger, the everything that's come up from the hurt, right? And getting to this place where perhaps I'm able to say, you know what, I don't like you, but I'm in a place now to where I believe again that you still deserve to be free as much as I do from suffering and to have the resources that you need. Because I don't want to get in the way of people getting free from suffering. Because you hurt me doesn't mean that everything should be restricted from you. And that's part of what we use in terms of restorative justice and in terms of abolition. Like, you have to start thinking in ways that help people gain access to the resources that they need, because that will begin to free so many of our interactions from violence and harm and domination and control.
It's reminding me what you say about compassion being so much more than just like thoughts and prayers or
Yeah.
say you're sorry,
Yeah.
or it true compassion being action that actually gets at the root
Yeah.
of the problem.
Yeah.
And you
And
can't get at that unless you've undergone this process.
exactly. And the root is complex. The harm that I experience is contextual. Everything's contextual. Like, there's a lot of other things happening that has informed this interaction. And we have to unpack that more, right? We have to have the space in our culture and our collective to unpack, okay, what really informed this situation? What really happened? And that takes a lot of energy to do that, and takes a lot of care. I often say too that, I've moved away from this idea that people are just evil. Instead, like, I've trained myself to understand that people are are doing the best that they can given the context that they are arising in. I don't know what people necessarily have been born into when I meet you, or see you somewhere for the first time, right? Like, we have to contextualize people. That means that we have to include the ways in which they're suffering, that may not be even evident to us in the moment, but everyone's suffering. And that suffering is informing our relationships with one another. Because if people are just inherently evil, how do they change? Evil people can't change, okay. But that actually lets us off from doing the emotional work to
Right.
contextualize people. It's just like an easy way to get out of doing the work for people. They're just
Right.
evil, whatever the language that we use, and we just keep it moving. Right. That says more about us though, right? And our capacities to have this fluid, open kind of emotional labor and contextualization with people.
what do you say to the person who, so many of
Yeah.
us are consumed
Mm.
with exhaustion. I
Yeah.
mean, from our own traumas, from the trauma of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, there are most days, and I have a pretty easy life, I gotta say, but there are most days where I just feel like I can't.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted. How do we conjure or cultivate, like, how does compassion have a chance? Because it's like you just said, it's so much work, it's so much energy.
Mm. Well, I think that definitely that can feel really isolating when I'm saying,
Hmm.
"Oh, me, I'm exhausted. How can I possibly do any of this?" This is when we say, "Okay, but who can I get support from? Who can I rely on? Who are my mentors and teachers and guides? Like who are my elders, right? Who are the people in my life who are really resourced to offer some support for me, to help me actually experience some mental space to actually make this more doable, right?" But that's those so relying on community is what we have to return back to, because I may be totally exhausted, but that doesn't mean everyone is. Like, and I have to remind myself of that as well often, like, because I'm experiencing something doesn't mean everyone is. So when I feel like just really tapped, I remember that I can ask for help. Friends, family, teachers, mentors, so many people in my community that I can rely on. This is what we call collective care, mutual aid. I have to remember that I'm a part of something bigger. I'm a part of a collective, and I can ask the collective for help when I need that. But also, here's another more kind of tangible thing. Like so many of us, yeah, overwhelmed, tired. It means that like we're doing other people's work that isn't ours. Right. I talk about boundaries in the book. This is part of radical self care. It's like I actually maybe should stop trying to do everyone's work right
Mm.
now. you know? And I tell
Yes, I know.
people,
Yeah.
people come to me with the exact same question and concern. I just go, okay, what are you doing that you actually shouldn't be doing right now? Like, what are you committed to that actually you should actually let go of? I think we all need to be going through that right now. It's like it's an overconsumer society, an overconsumer culture means that there's like a lot of stuff just like lying around that actually needs to be you know, um kind of purged. Relationships being one of those, right? Things being another thing, right? Um but we have to get clear about what we need as well. Like not just what we want, right? But having a real deep dive into figuring out what is it that I need to experience wellness and balance and connectedness, right? And what am I holding on to for emotional support, right? Because that's part of overconsumption. It's like we use material things for emotional support to feel good, right? Um,
In lieu of sometimes the bravery of
yeah,
asking for help, like when you were writing in the book about learning to set boundaries and respecting your time
yeah,
and then leaning into your community to ask for
yeah,
help.
yeah,
Like it blew my mind. I didn't know that there's a world that exists where I could ask the people that
yeah,
I'm trying to serve
yeah,
for help.
yeah,
Like the idea of learning how to do that itself as an act of love for
yeah,
the whole.
yeah, yeah. Can we work together?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have this mentality. I'm here to save everyone,
Right.
right? But actually, can we partner together to support each other? Because there are things that are being taught that have to go both ways. I have things to teach. The community has things to teach me in return, right? And that's going to keep me really like actually resourced and really sensitive to when I am kind of getting to the edge of being depleted. And that's where we're trying to get to, right? We want to develop a sensitivity of that edge instead of just waking up over the edge and going, "Oh my
Right.
god, how did I get here?" And then you're completely shut down. It's so hard to come back from over the edge. But when you're like, "Okay, here are the signs that I am moving over the line," and then you can make certain decisions, you know? I asked my team at the beginning of the year, I asked for help. I was like, "I don't wanna be overwhelmed. I don't wanna be depleted like I have been in the past. Can you help protect me from taking on too much?" And in turn, that offers me space to make sure that I'm able to offer the resources back to you that you need to be well, you
It
know?
makes such perfect, elegant sense when you say it like that.
Yeah.
When you're on
Yes.
the ground doing it, you're like, wait, I just want,"
But
Oh,
yeah, I mean, these are conversations we can have with our friends and
yeah.
families and partners. It's like when you notice me moving into certain spaces, certain territories, like tell me, please reflect back to me what's happening so I can, particularly if I'm not aware, that I can make different choices, you know, and I just ask you to help, make those choices as well. I think that's a really great conversation to have with people,
Mhm.
people close to you, because they're usually the ones who have to like help us anyway.
Right?
Right. So you just say, listen, instead
Yeah,
of just like coming in to rescue me while I'm over the edge, let me know when I'm getting to the edge
yeah.
and I can practice agency to make different choices. Right. And that means, yeah, I have to take a break. I have to take a break. I can't go out. I can't show up to this thing. I can't return the text. I can't have the calls, and you just communicate to people, this is the work that I'm doing. This is what's happening. And I can't always be available. Right. And if you're raising kids too, if you're a caretaker as well, this is the same thing. Working with a lot of parents, and also just having close friends with children and family members of the kids. Like this is something I'm always saying. It's just like get people involved with caretaking. Like I
Mm.
grew up in this kind of village model. I was very fortunate. I had a huge family. We have to like understand that like when we're talking about caretaking, think about like the village model. Like, again, not everyone is overwhelmed. We have to just ask for help. You need a break from your kids. Well, can you ask someone, like come over for an hour or two so I can take a break? And then, of course, yeah, some people may say, but I don't have anyone like that. And this is why building relationships is really important. Community and belonging is extremely important. Mutual aid. It's not just that I'm interested in just taking and taking, I'm also interested in offering back as well. What can I offer when I'm getting certain resources fulfilled or met?
I'm just thinking about the person listening to this right now
Mhm.
going, yeah, it's pretty broken. And I
Yeah,
don't have, I came from a small family and they're fractured and I
yeah,
don't have, my people, but there's always one little step you can build it. And it's
yes.
my experience is that it just seems to, it so wants to grow. It's almost like
Mm,
lighting fire to really dry grass. Like
yeah, yeah.
it wants to happen.
Absolutely, and I think a huge obstacle here are the ways in which we're so self-identified with struggling and depletion.
Yeah.
Because if we're not struggling or depleted, who are we? So we
Or we're
we
not
actually
doing a good job. I think
exactly,
many of us feel like
exactly.
if you don't think I'm working my fingers to the bone, then I'm a bad person and
Mhm.
I'm not successful or I'm not doing a good job or yeah.
Exactly, exactly,
Yeah.
right? And I think so much of that is these systems of violence that we're trying to abolish, capitalism being one of those, right? I
Mhm.
always have to be in motion, I always have to be doing, I have to justify, right, me taking up space and being alive, which kills people and it has killed many people. and will continue to kill people, that mentality, because where's the space for rest? And systems of violence, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, ableism, all the rest, it's not about resting, it's about doing.
Mhm.
You're not valuable if you're not doing something, producing something, right? Or engaged in some certain kinds of violence or whatever. This is what I in the book called the abolitionist dream. Like this is what we're dreaming into a future where where we get to choose our labor. If we need to rest, we rest. If we're sick, we have the space and the support to experience sickness, we that our work isn't tied to basic resources like health insurance and medical care and housing and and everything that we need to support being human. Right? We have to disrupt that and dream into a different kind of future.
You write beautifully about having this relationship with the unseen world,
Mhm.
with beings,
Mhm.
ancestors, and
Mhm.
I even feel on the verge of tears talking about it
Mhm.
because it's so beautiful.
Mhm.
But I think for me and for many of us, I think that's something we have tried over and over again to make contact with and haven't been
Mhm.
able to,
Yeah.
or don't even believe
Yeah.
is possible.
Yeah. And I think you are communicating. It's just that we have to learn how communication happens between the realms. Everything that I've been talking about, radical self-care and boundaries and everything is so supported by all these unseen beings. My ancestors, deities, um, you name it, right? For me, this shamanic worldview or an indigenous worldview or like a natural worldview is this complex view that says that, yeah, there's the physical and the spirit, the form or the formless, right? And for me, in my life, a returning back to a relationship to the unseen world has been crucial for me. Like when I need help, that's where I start with prayers, asking the ancestors. But this has been something innate in me my whole life. I I didn't need to be convinced, you know? Like, this was always an an issue, and I say an issue because it just felt like it just felt like too much early in my life. I just felt victimized by being sensitive, like, just feeling spirits and just having these kinds of experiences and dreams and so forth. I was like, how can you possibly protect yourself with beings you can't even see? Right? How is this even possible? So I was angry, I was scared, but I was always, always fascinated. It never stopped me from getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the science, of all of this, right? And I got to a place where realized, oh, like I actually have beings who love me around me who are actually protecting me. And I wonder what it would be like just to partner with them and to really rely on them, which means that like I just kind of got out of the way and let them love me, And that's when like my practice with the unseen world really, really took roots. I said, you know what? If you're here trying to love me, then love me, right? Protect me, guide me, And when I started doing that, my communication or my experience of communication deepened and became much more tangible. I think that's the thing that a lot of folks you kind of have to push through. When you're trying to like experience the unseen world, you have to start paying attention to how the unseen world is offering signs back to you that is paying attention, that is hearing. And that can be many things from physical sensations to dreams and visions to signs. I am a huge believer in signs. I follow the signs. When things things aren't so ironic anymore and coincidental. You know?
Right.
There's no randomness anymore in my life, right? There's a reason for things, and I pay attention to that. And that's a big way, the unseen world communicates for me as well. So you have to start paying attention. I say, people come to me about ancestors quite often, trying to start an ancestor practice. And I just say, just start talking to your ancestors. Like, not anything formal, just start talking, right? And then ask your ancestors to communicate with you and then pay attention to what happens over time. What is that communication, right? And then you'll get a lot of data, right? But that takes you deeper, right? Ancestor practice is really complex. Working with the unseen world is extremely complex, right? We need protections. We have to be smart. Like that, not every being around us wants us to be happy and well and
Right.
safe,
That
you
was a big
know?
question I had for you. So how do you, as somebody, so
Hmm.
at the beginning, I imagine you're blind to it. Like,
Yeah.
you think you know how they're going to talk to you. So you're
Yeah.
looking for, you're looking for them to talk to you the way that you would talk. So
Yeah.
that's not how they're going to
Right.
necessarily talk to you. I get that. But then you're almost feeling around in the dark. And at first, you
Hmm.
really don't know your way around. How do you know
Hmm.
who to strike up relationships with and who not to? What can you use to discern that?
Yeah.
Is that important? Will
Yes.
it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important to say, you know what? I only want beings around me who love me,
Okay.
who want me to be safe and happy. And any being who doesn't have that intention, I ask you to stay away. Not only do I ask you to stay away, I ask the beings who love me to protect me from these beings,
Okay.
right? Ask for what you need, right?
Right.
Ask, get
Here
real
we are
clear,
again. Right.
and that's a huge, again, that's the other huge obstacle. When I tell people just say what you need, and they're like, it has to be more than that. I was like, no, that's where you have to start, because like it's not, these beings aren't reading your mind. Like they're for a lot of folks, right, who aren't necessarily communicating, these beings are just trying to like take the clues up from what you're doing in your life. They're just trying to they're making assumptions and educated guess about, what you need. But instead, why don't you just tell them what you need?
Mhm.
And that cuts, that saves a lot of time, and you see really clear things happening like really quickly.
Do you think everybody has beings that
Mhm.
love them?
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't be alive, I think we're protected by beings, right? It doesn't matter if we're like, just like difficult people, right? There are beings who love us, right? Because this isn't our only life. Like, we've had many lives and we've had many relationships. And there are beings who remember what we've done for them in past lives, and they're in this, non-form state, spirit state, and they're like, I want to repay you. So I'm going to partner with you and help protect you, right? You don't have to know who these beings are. You just have to have some faith that they're with you. But yeah, like it takes a lot of like kind of stepping out into this unknowing. Like it's real. It's kind of feels like you're just floating in the middle of the air often with this,
Mhm.
right? But again, ask for signs, ask for data, ask for something and pay attention to it. Right? Help protect me. And then that's why we rely on the clergy class or shamans or teachers or however we want to label these beings, the intuitive psychics, mediums, and so forth. This future that's coming about through this apocalypse, I think, is a return of these folks into really influential positions again, not just woo woo people, but like people who have always been necessary in civilizations and societies throughout time. That capitalism and colonialism, patriarchy, and so forth, particularly patriarchy and misogyny, has devastated the position of the wise person, the shaman, the medicine person. in our culture. And we have to return back to these because these people hold a special position of being intermediaries between, the physical and the spirit worlds. I'm excited about that because that's the piece that we're missing. There's so much to navigate to get free, and we have to navigate the physical and the non-physical world. Well, we're ultimately non-physical beings anyway. We're energy, conscious energy, right? Ultimately. But we're having a physical experience in the body right now. So we have to navigate both of these experiences together. And that takes a lot of help and support, which may seem overwhelming for people listening to this. But again, ask for what you need and be honest.
And your part of it is your part of it. I heard somebody the other day, I can't remember who it was. It was an actor talking to somebody else, and he was saying, "You just have to play your hand."
Yeah.
They were talking about stepping away from, I know what it was. It was Ed Norton was talking
Okay.
to Rick Rubin
Hmm.
and they were talking about creativity and the creative process.
Yeah.
And he was saying, I'm lucky that I have the freedom to step away from my work and do nothing for a little while
Yeah.
because, I was just doing it by rote and it felt
Yeah.
meaningless. And they were talking about, well, what about the person who can't do
Yeah.
that? And I think Ed Norton just said, you play your hand. You live the life you're only where you are. So
Yeah.
and there's a trust. And when you can fall into that
Yeah.
trust of, I'm going to pull on this thread because it's the thread that I feel safe pulling
Yeah.
on right now. And I'm going to trust that it's connected to this whole other tapestry.
Yeah.
And like you're saying,
Mhm.
trust that I'm supported and that there is this love and lean into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so similar to this Zen proverb that says, jump and the net will appear.
Mm,
And I just think that's been so much of my life. Yeah, coming from very little and just saying, you know what, this is what I have to do. I have no resources to do it, but I'm going to do it. It doesn't make sense.
hmm
Right? But if
hmm
you're supposed to do it, it will happen. The resources will come. And that's been the case for everything that I've done in my life. Even now, I have these huge aspirations for certain, just really basic human things to happen in my life, right? And I'm just like, I'm just going to do it. And this is the faith that we have in the unseen, that we can rely on the unseen if we have a good relationship for sure, that they're going to organize the things that we need. Now, this isn't about getting rich. This isn't
Yep.
about getting
Yep.
famous. This is about
No.
getting what we need.
hmm
Like what you need, that's what they're there for. Like you need food, you need housing, you need, some type of medical insight. Okay, that's what they're there for. Or, ask for that help. Fame and wealth and all this other stuff, that's something else, you know, right? But what you need, let's start with that, you know?
It brings me to, I heard you say something in your interview with Tara Brock
Mhm.
about prayer. And when
Yeah,
we pray, what we're doing is we're bringing our longing to emptiness
yeah,
itself. And in my language, in the language I use, emptiness to me is the source of everything in the phenomenal world. So
yeah,
another word I use for it is creativity,
yes,
like God or God. I mean, but when I talk about creativity within the context of creative genius, I'm talking about that which animates everything, the
yeah,
intelligence that's animating everything simultaneously right now. And you were talking about when prayer is bringing and this was again like another portal opening in me when I heard you say these words. When we bring our prayer to that emptiness, whether it's a good or a bad prayer, we're collaborating in the
yeah,
manifestation of that. And I was like, oh my God, because I was raised to believe in the God that we need to let go of, which is
yeah,
that there's a God who believes in
mhm,
good and bad and is only
mhm,
going to favor and there's,
mhm,
no, which brings a whole new level to you have to be careful not only what you wish for,
yeah,
but what you're praying for.
exactly,
Because you could have, so does bad people,
yeah,
quote unquote bad people, praying for, and you can, I mean, myself, we've all had a fight with somebody where we prayed for
mm,
something
mhm,
in a moment of anger. But I just, so that made me want to ask you a little bit more about your prayer. What is your relationship to your prayer? And and what you allow yourself to ask for, or where's the discernment in that for you, and
Yeah.
how have you navigated that?
Yeah. I mean, I pray only for what is beneficial, right? And when I'm praying for something for myself, it is always in the context of understanding that whatever I receive helps me to help others even more. When I have when I'm resourced, I can resource others, right? So my prayers are about experiencing that resourcefulness and praying for what helps to reduce harm and violence and suffering in the world. Always, right? And that's a mindset that's rooted right within awakened care and all the principles of awakened care. It's it's an expansive decentering kind of prayer that may I and all beings have what they need to get free from suffering. Those prayers that we offer, for revenge, right? I mean, that's coming out of a lot of anger, you know? But the complexity here too is that, like, this is also about balance as well. Like, this reality is is balance. I think this is why the apocalypse is happening. Apocalypse is also about rebalancing. So you have to come back to center because we're somewhere in the extremes right now. And so when we come into prayer, it's just like, no, may we come back into balance. May there be balance because if there's no balance, then there's discontent, right? There's extremism, and we don't get free through extremes, right? You get free through balance and wholeness. This doesn't mean that you don't visit the extremes because I think you have to visit extremes to actually figure out what the extreme is. And then you're able to say, you know what, that's not what I'm doing.
Mm.
you know? So let's mosey back on into the center now. I think some of the most profound spiritual teachers have been people who've lived extremes and they
Mhm.
get it. Like I don't like being around with, spiritual teachers who haven't lived. I want people to have an experience of life and of mistakes and surviving and struggling, right? In the same way I have. But to open our minds and to say, may all beings have what they need to get free from suffering, may I have what I need to get free from suffering, is perhaps one of the most powerful prayers because emptiness is really about freedom. So you're aligning yourself with the essence of the universe, which is freedom.
You write about being queer and how the queer community has used absurdity and camp to cultivate joy in the
Yeah.
face of repression. And soon after that, you're writing about the four sweet liberations, and which you dedicated to Black queer and gender expressive people. And you say, and I'm gonna read what you wrote. We sing because we are happy. We sing because our hearts are full of sorrow. And we sing because those who wish us dead need to hear what real beauty sounds like,
Mhm,
so that they too can remember their beauty and their preciousness.
mhm.
I just was so moved by that. That was so beautiful. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about joy as a radical act and joy
Yeah,
in this context.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think joy isn't about bypassing in this context. In the context that I come from in my community, like we chose joy as a way to hold the struggle, to remember that we weren't just the struggle or what was being projected onto our bodies. And that joy offered us the space to kind of shake off some of these projections and to say, no matter what you're telling me I am, I have the space to experience who I really am. And so much can happen in that space. And I think it's often
Yeah.
been misunderstood by dominant cultures. Like when you look like people, growing up black and queer people looking at black folks having fun in the middle of like crisis, you know, and the judgment that comes from that is like, no, this is actually how we're surviving crisis,
Yeah.
is how we're managing, like when we're laughing and having fun, even as we're mourning the death of beloved ones, like beloveds. Like that's how we transform this heaviness, and we start moving and we start getting fluid and we start remembering our gratitude that we're still grateful regardless of the struggle and the pain and the despair and the hopelessness, that there's still so much to be grateful for, right? That this world is not our home primarily, right? That this is just an experience that we're having, but this isn't like the ultimate experience, right? That we're still kind of leaning towards that ultimate experience and training to return back to that experience of freedom, which is emptiness.
There's such a fear around doing things that hurt or being with things that hurt.
Yeah.
And at the risk of sounding like one of those inspirational posters, right? Like the gift is in but the gift is in the
Right.
suffering.
It is.
It's right
It's true.
there.
It's
And I've
absolutely true.
actually I feel like we unlock something in our
Yeah.
DNA. I'm not a scientist. I'm terrible at math and science. Like, it's not my world. But I intuitively just feel like we unlock something in our physical form
Yeah.
when we're able to be with our struggle, be with our, even if it's dissatisfaction or as discord or as strong as
Yeah.
suffering, like the gift
Mhm.
is right there. And that's just such a beautiful,
Mhm.
rainbow and sparkle colored example of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunately the one thing that I don't have, like, a magic pill for is that, like, you have to choose the suffering.
Mhm.
Like, you have to choose to tend to it, and it's not fun.
Mm,
It's not glamorous. But, again, you're not the only one doing it. This is why
mhm,
collective labor is so important. People remind me that this is the work that we are all doing together to not just uplift our individual lives, but the lives of the collective. We're doing this together, and this is the only way to get free. And the more we work with our suffering, the more our suffering changes, right? The more we work with death, the more we become less afraid of death, and death changes for us. But you'll
mm.
never get there if we keep running away, and it will change you. Are you ready to change?
I think that that's also something we need to give ourselves grace with, because I think of a tomato plant, and no matter, you plant the seed for the tomato plant, and no matter how much you're ready to eat a tomato, that tomato seed is just going to sprout when it's ready to sprout.
Yeah,
And I feel like that readiness in us to be willing to go back to that wholeness is a choice, but it's also kind of a choiceless choice. Like, you're
exactly,
ready when you're ready, and to
exactly.
be gentle with yourself. If you're not ready, there's a reason why, and
Yep,
it's okay.
yep, exactly.
Yeah, you close out the book with a beautiful thought about how wholeness is is no trifling matter.
Mhm,
It's true. It's
mhm.
true. I wondered if to close us out you
Mhm.
would read, there's a beautiful little bit at the end on page 269, and it starts with, I consent to this work.
Yep, absolutely. And this is the last paragraph, I think, on 269. Well, the last paragraph of the book. So, just before I talk about the salt eaters, which you just mentioned, and this healer, Minnie, who asks this character who's beginning her healing process, "Are you ready to get healed?" Right? So, picking up with that idea, beginning with the last paragraph, I hear many asking me this question right now, asking if I am ready to get more than just healed, asking if I am ready to get free. It seems like my whole life has been an answer to this question. And though sometimes I am confused about what freedom feels like, or if I am as free as I think I am, I know this for sure. I consent to this sacred work. I consent to the heartbrokenness, the rage, and the hopelessness, as well as to the joy, the gratitude, and the care. I consent to the weight of being healed and the responsibility I choose to get others well and free. This has been the only choice for me in this life. With the help of the saints, both old and new, I keep moving on.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for all of what you're bringing into the world and how many people you're helping
Mm.
and serving. Thank you.
Thank you.
I close out every episode with what I call the billboard question. The idea is that if you had this magical billboard that every person in the world who longed to, whether it would be connect with the ancestors
Mm.
or feel the truth or resolve their trauma or learn to truly forgive, but for all the reasons that stop us,
Mm.
just don't feel that it's available to them. Just
Yeah.
don't feel that it's possible or could happen in their lifetime to them. But they were reading this magical billboard from Lama Rod, and it reached in and it ignited something. What
Mhm.
would you put on that billboard to reach their hearts?
It would say, "You have all the resources you need. You just have to ask for them."
Lama Rod, this has been such a treasure of a moment in my
Mm.
life to connect with you this way.
Oh,
Thank you
thank
deeply from my
you.
heart.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you for the space.
What is the best way for
Mhm.
somebody who's listening to this right now who just feels so filled and
Mhm.
so and wants to support you and wants
Mhm.
to get your book and wants to stay connected to you? What is the best way for us all to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Visiting my website at lamarod.com is a great way to see what I'm up to, see what I'm doing. Is a great way to offer a donation and to support the work, if you feel moved. In terms of books, they're all accessible always on your favorite online bookseller, preferably, independent booksellers online and also independent bookstores. Quite frankly, at this point, any bookstore,
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
support any bookstore right now.
Right? Yeah.
And I have a newsletter you can sign up for as well. We keep it pretty concise, you know, and online, in terms of social media, Lama Rod Official on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, as well as Facebook.
I'm going to put links to all of that in the show notes.
Mhm.
So if you're driving down the road right now and you're listening to Lamrod telling you all that, don't worry. We'll put it in the show notes and you can find all the links.